You sold my car, I repeated, still standing outside the hospital entrance with my discharge papers shaking in my hand. My mother sighed into the phone like I was being dramatic. Natalie, you were in surgery for 4 days. You weren't using it. I genuinely thought I heard her wrong. Mom, what are you talking about? The dealership already picked it up yesterday, she said casually. Honestly, you should be thanking me. That car was becoming a burden. Then another call started buzzing through on my phone. Unknown number. I answered automatically, still trying to process what my mother had just admitted. Ms. Brooks, a nervous man asked. This is Greenfield Auto Group. Ma'am, there's a problem with the ownership records on your vehicle. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 36 years old, and until that phone call, I honestly believed there were limits to what family members would do to each other. I was wrong. 2 weeks earlier, I had emergency abdominal surgery after ignoring severe pain for almost a month because I couldn't afford to miss work. I managed operations for a small property management company outside Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous. Mostly tenant complaints, maintenance emergencies, and long hours fixing problems nobody else wanted to deal with. But the job paid my bills. And more importantly, it helped me keep supporting my mother financially, which I had been doing for nearly 8 years. After my father left when I was 23, everything slowly started falling onto me. Rent assistance, medical bills, grocery money. Every family emergency somehow became my responsibility because I was the stable one. Meanwhile, my younger brother Tyler disappeared any time money got mentioned, and my mother somehow always had a reason she couldn't work consistently for long. I tried not to resent them for it. At least not openly. The one thing in my life that truly belonged to me was my grandfather's car. A dark blue 1968 Mustang he spent years restoring by hand in his garage before he passed away. Most people saw an old classic car. I saw the last real piece of someone who actually made me feel protected growing up. Grandpa trusted paperwork more than promises. He used to say that constantly. People lie when money gets involved, Natalie. Documents don't. At the time, I thought he was just being old-fashioned. I didn't realize he was warning me. After Grandpa died 3 years earlier, my mother became strangely obsessed with the Mustang. She kept bringing up its value, asking how much collectors would pay for it, suggesting I cash out instead of keeping it stored carefully in my apartment garage. Every time I refused, she acted offended. Like I was selfish for keeping something that mattered to me. And standing outside that hospital with stitches still healing under my sweatshirt, I suddenly realized she hadn't stopped asking about the car because she admired it. She stopped because she had already started planning. If a family member ever made you feel guilty for protecting something important to you, you probably already understand where this story is heading. Subscribe if you've ever been treated like your kindness was an unlimited resource, and tell me in the comments if someone close to you ever crossed a line you never thought they would. Click like if you're ready, because the dealership was about to tell me something my mother never expected me to find out. The hospital finally released me around noon. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt exhausted, sore, and completely numb from the conversation with my mother. Standing near the pickup area with a small overnight bag pressed against my side, I kept replaying her words in my head. You weren't using it anyway. Like my car was an old chair she donated while I was unconscious. The curb outside the hospital buzzed with noise. Nurses moving quickly, cars pulling up, families hugging discharged patients. Meanwhile, I stood there trying not to cry from a mixture of pain, medication, and disbelief. My mother arrived 20 minutes later in her silver SUV. The second I climbed inside, I asked again. You actually sold Grandpa's Mustang. She barely glanced at me while adjusting the air conditioning. Natalie, please don't start. Don't start, I stared at her. Mom, you sold my car while I was in surgery. You were in no condition to handle things yourself. It wasn't your decision. She exhaled dramatically like I was exhausting her. Somebody had to act like an adult. That sentence hit me harder than it should have. I leaned back carefully against the seat, trying not to pull my stitches. You had no right. Oh, please, she snapped. You care more about that car than your own family sometimes. I looked out the window before answering, because anger was starting to rise too fast. That car belonged to Grandpa. And Grandpa is gone, she replied immediately. You can't keep clinging to objects forever. I turned toward her slowly. How much did you sell it for? Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. That's not important. It's extremely important. She hesitated just long enough to make my stomach twist. 32,000, she muttered. My chest tightened instantly. The Mustang was worth far more than that. Even I knew that. You undersold it, I asked in disbelief. It needed repairs. No, it didn't. Well, the buyer said. The buyer, I interrupted. You already had somebody lined up. She didn't answer. And suddenly, I realized this wasn't some rushed decision made during my hospitalization. She had been planning this. For how long, I didn't know. The rest of the drive passed in tense silence until we pulled into my apartment complex. The empty parking space waiting near my building made the entire situation feel painfully real for the first time. I stared at the spot where Grandpa's Mustang always sat covered carefully beneath the garage awning. Gone. Just gone. You're overreacting, my mother said while turning off the engine. That money will help this family. I looked at her sharply. What money? She froze for half a second. Then she smiled too quickly. Hospital bills, expenses, things add up. My stomach dropped. You already spent it. Natalie. Before she could finish, my phone rang again. Greenfield Auto Group. I answered immediately. Ms. Brooks, the same nervous employee from earlier said, we really need you to come down here today if possible. Why? A long pause followed. Then he lowered his voice. Because according to the ownership records, your mother legally may not have had the authority to sell the vehicle at all. I felt the blood drain from my face. My mother noticed instantly. What did they say? She asked carefully. But for the first time all day, I noticed something strange. She suddenly looked nervous too. I barely slept that night. Every movement pulled painfully against my stitches, but honestly, the physical pain wasn't even the worst part anymore. My mind kept replaying everything my mother said during the drive home. 32,000. The number bothered me almost as much as the sale itself. Because Grandpa's Mustang was worth far more than that. Even unfinished project cars sold for higher prices online. Grandpa spent nearly 12 years restoring that car piece by piece in his garage. Original engine, custom interior, rare factory parts he tracked down across 3 states. There was no way somebody accidentally underpriced it that badly. Which meant either my mother got manipulated, or she never cared about the actual value in the first place. By 10 the next morning, I was sitting carefully inside Greenfield Auto Group, trying not to look as exhausted as I felt. The dealership manager, a nervous man named Kevin, led me into a small office near the back hallway. I'm really sorry about all this, he said immediately while closing the door. We didn't realize there was an issue until our title department started reviewing the transfer paperwork. I lowered myself slowly into the chair across from his desk. What kind of issue? Kevin exchanged a quick glance with another employee standing near the filing cabinet. Then he slid a folder toward me. Inside were copies of the sale documents. And right there, on the signature page, was my name. Or at least a terrible version of it. I stared at the shaky handwriting in disbelief. That's not my signature. Kevin nodded carefully. That's what we suspected. A cold feeling spread through my chest. She forged it. We can't officially accuse anyone yet, he said quickly, but there were enough inconsistencies that we paused the ownership transfer before final approval. I rubbed my forehead slowly. None of this felt real. My mother had crossed lines before, borrowed money she never repaid, opened store credit cards under my name once when I was 25 and desperate to avoid family conflict. But this was different. This was criminal. She told us you were recovering and had given verbal authorization, Kevin continued carefully. At first, everything sounded legitimate. But Kevin opened another document. But the vehicle ownership records flagged something unusual. I looked down at the page. My grandfather's name. Then mine. And beneath both names was something else. Trust protection authorization. What is that? I asked quietly. Kevin hesitated. Honestly, we were hoping you could tell us. My stomach tightened immediately. Because suddenly, I remembered something from years earlier. A conversation in Grandpa's garage, only a few months before he died. He was sitting beside the Mustang, holding a folder while explaining insurance paperwork to me. At the time, I barely listened because legal discussions always bored me. But now certain words came rushing back. If anything ever happens to me, he said back then, don't let anybody pressure you into signing things too quickly. I blinked hard, trying to remember more. There are protections in place, he had added. Protections. At the time, I assumed he meant regular insurance coverage. Now I wasn't so sure anymore. Kevin cleared his throat carefully. There's another problem, he admitted. I looked up. The buyer already paid a deposit and arranged transport. I stared at him. So where's the car now? In secured storage until ownership verification clears. For the first time since leaving the hospital, I felt a small amount of relief. At least Grandpa's car wasn't gone yet. But that relief disappeared seconds later when Kevin handed me another page. A printed copy of the emergency contact information submitted during the sale. My mother listed herself as primary family authority. And underneath that, my younger brother Tyler signed as witness. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like one terrible decision anymore. It felt planned. I drove straight to my mother's house after leaving the dealership. Well, technically, drove was generous. My stitches still hurt every time I pressed the brakes, and halfway there I had to pull into a pharmacy parking lot just to breathe through the pain for a few minutes. But anger kept me moving. Not just because of the forged signature. Because Tyler was involved too. That part hurt differently. My younger brother spent most of his adult life avoiding responsibility like it was contagious. He disappeared when bills showed up, ignored family emergencies, and somehow always found excuses whenever our mother needed help. But the second money became involved. Suddenly, he was available. By the time I reached Mom's neighborhood, my hands were shaking again. Her SUV sat in the driveway beside Tyler's black pickup truck. Of course he was there. I walked inside without knocking. The moment my mother saw my face, her expression tightened. Natalie, not now. Actually, now is perfect. Tyler looked up from the kitchen table holding a sandwich. Uh-oh. I threw the dealership paperwork onto the counter. You forged my signature. Mom glanced at the papers, but didn't touch them. Nobody forged anything. That is literally not my handwriting. She crossed her arms immediately. You were unconscious. Somebody had to make decisions. You had no legal authority to sell my car. Tyler suddenly stood up. Okay, everybody calm down. I turned toward him sharply. You signed as witness. His face changed instantly. Mom asked me to. I laughed once in disbelief. That's your defense. She said the hospital bills were getting bad. My mother jumped in immediately. Because they are getting bad, Natalie. You could have talked to me. Oh, please, she snapped. You always act like you're the only responsible person in this family. I stared at her. Because the craziest part was that she actually sounded offended. Like she was the victim here. That car belonged to Grandpa, I said carefully. You had no right. And I took care of your grandfather for years, she shot back. Do you think that was free? The room went quiet. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. There it was. The real reason. Not hospital bills. Not family emergencies. Resentment. Mom moved closer now, voice shaking emotionally. Your grandfather left everything to you, she continued bitterly. You got the car, the trust attention, the special treatment. That's not true. Yes, it is, Tyler muttered from the kitchen. I looked at him in shock. You too. He shrugged uncomfortably. Grandpa always trusted you more. That sentence hit harder than I expected because deep down, they weren't wrong. Grandpa did trust me more. Not because I was smarter. Because I handled responsibility differently. And suddenly, I realized they'd probably carried that resentment for years. Mom pointed toward the paperwork angrily. That car should have stayed with this family. It was with family, I snapped back. Me. No, she replied coldly. You kept it hidden in a garage like some museum piece while the rest of us struggled. I stared at her in disbelief. For years, I paid her rent multiple times, covered utilities, helped with groceries, sent money whenever she claimed things were falling apart. And somehow she still saw me as selfish for refusing to sell the one thing Grandpa left specifically to me. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Richard Hale. I frowned immediately at the name. Richard was Grandpa's old estate lawyer. I hadn't spoken to him since the funeral nearly 3 years earlier. Slowly, I answered. Natalie, Richard said calmly, I believe we need to discuss your grandfather's trust immediately. My mother's expression changed the second she heard his name. And for the first time since I walked into the house, she looked genuinely afraid. I stepped outside before continuing the call with Richard Hale. Not because I wanted privacy. Because I needed air. My mother's face through the window stayed frozen in a look I had never seen before. Not anger, not denial, something closer to panic. Tyler lingered behind her, suddenly quiet. I walked down the porch steps and finally spoke into the phone. Mr. Hale, I didn't expect to hear from you. His voice was steady, almost careful. I wish this were under better circumstances. I leaned against the railing, still feeling the hospital pain in my side. What's going on? A pause. Then he said something that made everything in my chest tighten. Your grandfather anticipated this. I blinked. Anticipated what? Family pressure, Richard replied, especially around the Mustang. My grip tightened on the phone. He left specific instructions in the trust documents regarding the vehicle. I looked back toward the house. My mother was still watching me through the window. Instructions like what? Richard exhaled slowly. Natalie, your mother did not have legal authority to transfer ownership without secondary approval. My stomach dropped. What does that mean exactly? It means, he said carefully, she could initiate paperwork, but she couldn't finalize any sale without your consent or a trustee verification. I went completely still. So the dealership is currently holding the vehicle, he finished, because the transfer is legally incomplete. For a second, I couldn't respond. The wind moved lightly through the trees, but everything inside me felt locked in place. So she basically sold something she couldn't legally sell, I said slowly. That is correct. I closed my eyes. Grandpa. Even after death, he was still protecting me. Richard continued, there's more you should know. Of course there was. I reviewed the file after the dealership contacted me. Your mother has attempted similar informal transfers before involving other assets tied to the estate. My eyes opened immediately. What? Small financial accounts. Nothing major enough to trigger alerts at the time. But patterns matter, Natalie. Patterns? That word stuck in my head. Because suddenly, Everything made sense in a way I didn't want it to. The guilt trips, the urgency, the emotional pressure every time money came up. This wasn't random behavior anymore. This was a pattern. Behind me, the front door opened. I turned slightly. My mother stood on the porch now, arms crossed tightly. "Who are you talking to?" she asked sharply. I didn't answer her. Richard spoke again in my ear. "I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning," he said. "Bring whatever documentation you have from the dealership." My mother stepped closer down the steps. "Natalie." I covered the phone slightly. "I'm busy." "That's Richard Hale, isn't it?" she asked. I looked at her. Her voice changed instantly. "Why are you talking to him?" Tyler appeared behind her now, watching silently. Richard's voice came through again. "Natalie, I strongly recommend you do not discuss any details with your family until we review everything properly." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. "Okay," I said. But my mother clearly heard enough. Her face tightened. "You're taking this seriously." I lowered the phone. "You sold my car without permission." "I was helping you." "No," I said firmly for the first time. "You were controlling something that wasn't yours." Her expression hardened immediately. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me." There it was again. That line, like my entire life, was supposed to be payment for her existence. Richard spoke quietly in my ear again. "Natalie, I need to warn you about something." I stepped farther away from the porch. "What?" A pause. Then he said it. "If your mother attempted to finalize that sale knowing she lacked authority, she may now try to justify it legally before we intervene." I frowned. "How?" "She may claim verbal consent." I froze. Behind me, my mother suddenly said something that made my blood run cold. "She agreed to it," she called out. I turned slowly. "What?" Her voice was louder now, more confident. "You told me to handle it," she said. "You were in surgery, Natalie. You said I should take care of things." Tyler shifted uncomfortably behind her. "That's not true," I said immediately. But she didn't even flinch. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't just about a car anymore. It was about who they were going to make everyone believe I was. The next morning, I didn't go back to my mother's house. I went straight to Richard Hale's office instead. It was tucked between two older brick buildings downtown, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. The sign outside still had his name engraved in faded gold letters, like time had passed, but the office refused to admit it. Inside, everything was quiet, organized, intentional. Richard was already waiting. He didn't waste time with greetings, just slid a thick folder across the desk toward me. "Before we go further," he said, "I need you to understand how serious this is becoming." I opened the folder slowly. Inside were copies of trust documents, signatures, and handwritten notes from my grandfather. Seeing his handwriting again hit harder than I expected. Richard continued, "Your mother is now claiming you verbally authorized the sale." I looked up immediately. "That's a lie." "I know," he said calmly. "But legally, claims like that create delays, and delays create leverage." That word made my stomach tighten. Leverage. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "Tell me exactly what happened the day she sold the car." So I did. The hospital, the surgery, the phone call. The way she said it so casually, like she was talking about returning library books instead of selling something that didn't belong to her. Richard listened, without interrupting. When I finished, he tapped the folder lightly. "There's something your mother doesn't seem to understand," he said. "What's that?" She was never the decision-maker in this estate structure. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He reached for another document. "Your grandfather set up a layered trust system. Most of the family only knows about the basic distribution. But there's a secondary protection layer tied specifically to high-value sentimental assets. My eyes narrowed slightly, like the Mustang. Richard nodded. And he hesitated. That was new. And, he continued carefully, your grandfather assigned co-protection rights to you. I blinked. I don't understand. It means, he said, you weren't just the beneficiary. You were also a required approval party for any transfer involving the vehicle. My mind went blank for a second. So even if I was unconscious? Yes, Richard said, the system would still flag it. I sat back slowly. Then how did she even start the sale process? That's what concerns me, he replied. Someone inside the dealership initially accepted her claim of authority before the system flagged the inconsistency. I frowned, so they almost pushed it through anyway. Yes. A heavy silence settled between us. Then Richard said something that changed the tone completely. Natalie, this isn't just a family misunderstanding anymore. I looked up. This is a failed verification attempt that could have resulted in a fraudulent transfer if the safeguards hadn't triggered in time. My stomach tightened again. Outside the office window, the city moved normally. Cars passing, people walking, nobody aware of what was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. So what happens now? I asked. Richard folded his hands. Now, he said, we confirm intent. Intent. Whether your mother genuinely believed she had authority, or whether she knowingly bypassed safeguards. I felt my chest tighten. And if it's the second one? He didn't answer immediately. Which was answer enough. Instead, he opened another file and slid it toward me. This is something your grandfather left with explicit instructions to be opened only if interference was suspected. I stared at it. My name was written on the front, in his handwriting. Richard looked at me carefully. I think you're about to learn, he said quietly, why he trusted you more than anyone else in the family. I didn't open the file right away. I just stared at my grandfather's handwriting like it might change if I looked long enough. Richard noticed. You don't have to rush, he said gently. But something inside me already knew I didn't want to wait. Not after everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. I opened it. Inside was a letter, a copy of the trust amendment, and something that made my breath catch immediately. A handwritten note from my grandfather. Not long, not emotional, just direct. Natalie, if you are reading this, someone has tried to take advantage of your silence. Don't let them. I swallowed hard. Richard leaned forward slightly. He wrote that after your mother asked about the Mustang's value a few months before he passed. I looked up. He told you that? He told me a lot of things, Richard said. He was very specific about what he feared might happen after he was gone. My throat tightened. So he knew. He suspected patterns, Richard corrected, and he planned accordingly. I kept reading. The trust amendment confirmed what Richard had said earlier, but with more detail. My name wasn't just listed as a co-beneficiary. I was a required authorization point for any transfer, lease, or sale involving the Mustang or any asset designated under sentimental preservation. It even included a clause stating that verbal consent alone was invalid, which meant my mother's entire claim didn't just fail morally. It failed legally. Richard watched me carefully. There's something else you should know. I looked up again. The dealership has now officially paused all transfer activity, he said, but they're also under pressure from the buyer who already placed a deposit. I frowned, so they're involved too. In a limited sense, he replied. They acted on what they believed was valid authorization. I exhaled slowly. So what happens to the buyer? If the transfer is invalidated, Richard said, they will be refunded, but this may escalate if they believe the dealership misrepresented ownership. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. Nothing about this felt simple anymore. It wasn't just my mother selling my car. It was systems, documents, legal safeguards, and people making assumptions that almost erased my rights completely. And the worst part, it only failed because Grandpa built it to fail safely. If he had, I stopped that thought immediately. Richard closed the folder gently. We need to decide your next step. I blinked. My next step. Yes, he said, because once we formally challenge your mother's claim of verbal consent, she will be forced to respond legally. That word again. Legally. It suddenly made everything feel heavier. She's going to lose her mind, I said quietly. Richard didn't deny it. Possibly. I looked down at my hands. I wasn't scared of the legal system. I was scared of what it would do to my family. Even after everything, there was still a part of me that remembered holidays, birthdays, old photos where we all looked like we actually liked each other. What if I don't escalate it? I asked. Richard studied me carefully. Then the car stays frozen, he said, but so does accountability. That hit differently. Accountability. Because that's what this really was now. Not just getting my car back, but deciding whether what happened was something we were going to pretend didn't happen. Richard stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a small key card. I need you to understand something important, he said. I looked up. Your grandfather didn't just protect assets, he continued. He protected your ability to say no without being pressured. My chest tightened again. He slid the key card toward me. This gives you direct access to the trust verification system. If your mother attempts any further unauthorized action, it will flag instantly. I stared at it. It felt heavier than it should have. Richard's voice softened slightly. Whatever you decide next, he said, make sure it's based on facts, not guilt. And for the first time since all this started, I realized guilt was the only weapon my family still had left. The drive back to my apartment felt different. Not calmer, not clearer. Just heavier. The kind of silence that sits in your chest even when the radio is on. Richard's key card rested in the passenger seat the entire way, like I was afraid to even put it away in the glove box. Every red light gave me too much time to think. Facts, not guilt. That's what Richard had said. But guilt was something my family had spent years teaching me to obey without question. By the time I got home, my phone was already buzzing. Multiple missed calls from my mother. 3 texts from Tyler. 1 voicemail. I didn't listen to it. Instead, I sat on my couch for a long time just staring at the wall, trying to decide what kind of person I was going to be in this situation. The daughter who kept the peace. Or the daughter who finally stopped absorbing damage for everyone else. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Natalie, my mother said immediately. Her voice was sharp, controlled. Where are you? At home. You need to fix this. I stayed quiet. This dealership situation is getting out of hand, she continued. They're asking questions I can't answer. That's because you sold something you didn't own. A pause. Then her tone shifted instantly. I raised you, she said. I took care of you when your father left. There it was. The shift. Not denial anymore. Emotion. Pressure. Control. I never asked you to sell my car, I replied calmly. You don't understand what I sacrificed for this family. I understand that you sold my property while I was in surgery. Her breathing got louder through the phone. Do you know how humiliating this is for me? She snapped. The dealership thinks I committed fraud. My stomach tightened slightly at her choice of words. They're not wrong, I said quietly. That made her go silent for a second. Then Tyler jumped in from the background. Mom, she's not listening, he said. I closed my eyes. So he was there too. Of course he was. My mother came back on the line, voice lower now. Natalie, just tell them you gave permission. That's all they need. I opened my eyes slowly. And that was the moment everything became crystal clear. Not confusion. Not misunderstanding. A request to lie. No, I said. Another silence. Then her voice turned colder. After everything I've done for you, you're really going to do this? I looked out my window. Cars passed normally outside. People went about their lives like nothing was collapsing anywhere. But inside my apartment, everything had already shifted. I'm not lying, I said. She exhaled sharply. Fine, she said. Then I guess you're okay with destroying your own family. Click. She hung up. I sat there for a long time after that, phone still in my hand. That was the part that hurt more than anything else. Not the car. Not the paperwork. Not even the betrayal. It was how quickly she was willing to turn me into the problem for refusing to participate in a lie. My phone buzzed again almost immediately. A message from Richard. Don't respond to pressure calls. They are testing your boundaries. I stared at it. Testing your boundaries. It sounded clinical, but it felt exactly right. Because that's what this was now. Not a misunderstanding. A test. That evening, another call came in. This time from the dealership. But it was Kevin. It was a different voice. Calmer. More serious. Ms. Brooks, the man said, this is the regional compliance officer. We need you to come in tomorrow morning. There's a formal review being opened regarding the attempted transfer. I sat up slowly. Is this about my mother? A pause. Yes, he said, and one more thing. My grip tightened. The buyer has requested legal clarification on who is actually responsible for misrepresentation in this case. My stomach dropped slightly. Because that meant this was no longer private. It was moving outward. And by tomorrow morning, everyone was going to have to pick a side. The dealership looked different in daylight. Too clean, too quiet, too normal for what was about to happen inside it. I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes before going in, just watching people walk through the glass doors like nothing heavy was waiting on the other side. Richard texted me once. I'm inside, don't let them rush you. That was enough to make me finally move. When I stepped into Greenfield Auto Group, the receptionist looked up immediately and recognized me. Ms. Brooks, she said softly, they're waiting for you in conference room 2. Not please come in. Not follow me. Waiting. That word sat heavily in my chest as I walked down the hallway. The conference room door was slightly open. I could hear voices before I even entered. My mother. Tyler. And a third voice I didn't recognize. A calm, professional tone. I pushed the door open. The room went quiet instantly. My mother was seated at one end of the table, arms crossed tightly. Tyler sat beside her looking uncomfortable. Across from them were 2 dealership representatives and a man in a suit I assumed was compliance. And then I saw Richard. He gave me a small nod. That was it. No drama, no build-up, just acknowledgement that I was where I needed to be. Thank you for coming, Ms. Brooks, the compliance officer said. My mother immediately spoke. This is unnecessary. We've already explained everything. No, the officer replied calmly. You've provided a version of events, not verification. Tyler shifted in his seat. I sat down slowly across from them. And the moment I did, my mother's eyes locked onto mine. This is ridiculous, she said sharply. They're treating me like a criminal. Richard finally spoke. Let's begin with documentation, he said, sliding a folder forward. My mother scoffed. More paperwork. But she didn't look at it. That was the first red flag. The compliance officer opened the file. Vehicle transfer records, he said, submitted during hospitalization period of the owner. My mother leaned forward. She told me I could handle things. I didn't react. The officer turned to me. Ms. Brooks, did you give verbal authorization for sale or transfer of your vehicle? No, I said clearly. My mother exhaled sharply. You're lying. Nobody responded to that. The officer continued reading. Signature discrepancy identified. Ownership verification incomplete. Trust restriction flag triggered prior to final transfer. Tyler finally spoke. What does that mean? Richard answered without hesitation. It means the sale, never legally completed. My mother's posture changed slightly, just enough for me to notice. The officer looked directly at her now. Do you understand that you attempted to finalize a transfer without verified authorization from all required parties? I had permission, she insisted. From whom? Richard asked. She hesitated, then pointed at me. Her voice rose slightly. From my daughter. She was in the hospital. She told me to take care of things. I shook my head once. No, I didn't. Silence followed. The compliance officer leaned back slightly, reviewing notes. Then we have a serious issue, he said. My mother suddenly turned toward me. Her voice softened instantly. Natalie, why are you doing this? That question hit differently than the others. Not anger. Not accusation. Confusion wrapped in desperation. Because it's not true, I said quietly. Her eyes filled with frustration immediately. You're punishing me for helping you. No, I replied. I'm stopping you from rewriting what happened. Tyler suddenly spoke again, more nervous now. Mom, maybe we should just explain everything clearly. She snapped at him instantly. Don't turn on me too. That reaction made the room shift. Even the compliance officer noticed it. Richard leaned forward slightly. There's one more document, he said. He placed a final page on the table. My grandfather's trust clause. My mother looked at it and frowned. I don't care what that says. But Richard's voice was steady. This clause requires co-authorization from Ms. Brooks for any transfer involving the vehicle. He looked directly at her. You did not have it. For the first time since this started. My mother didn't respond immediately. She just stared at the paper. And I realized something very important. This wasn't the end of the situation for her. It was the moment she realized she might actually lose control of it. The silence in the conference room didn't last long. My mother broke it first. This is ridiculous, she said, pushing the trust document away like it physically offended her. You're all acting like I stole something. Richard didn't react. He just stayed calm, which somehow made everything feel worse for her. You did sell a vehicle without completed authorization, the compliance officer said evenly. That falls under misrepresentation. Tyler shifted in his chair. Mom, maybe just calm down. She shot him a look that shut him up instantly. Then she turned back to me. This is what you wanted, she asked sharply, to drag your own mother into a legal mess over a car. I stayed still, because I could feel something changing in me now. Not anger, not sadness. Clarity. I didn't drag you into anything, I said quietly. You did it when you forged my signature. Her expression tightened. I didn't forge anything. Richard finally spoke again, placing another document on the table. Forensic signature comparison confirms otherwise, he said. That sentence landed like a weight. My mother laughed once, but it sounded forced. So now you're bringing in handwriting experts. The compliance officer nodded slightly. Yes. The room tightened again. My mother leaned back in her chair, but her hands were no longer steady. This is insane, she muttered. All of this over something that can be reversed in 5 minutes. It already has been paused, the officer replied. We are here to determine liability before proceeding further. Tyler looked between everyone. Liability for what exactly? Richard answered him directly. For attempted transfer of an asset without valid authorization. My mother's voice rose. I was taking care of family business while she was in surgery. That is not legal authority, the officer said calmly. The words, legal authority, made her pause for half a second. I saw it. That tiny shift. The moment she realized emotion wasn't going to fix this. She turned back toward me again, but softer now. Natalie, please, she said, don't do this. There it was again. The switch. From anger to guilt. From control to pleading. You know, I didn't mean any harm. I looked at her carefully. And for the first time, I didn't feel pulled by it. I believe you didn't think it would go this far, I said. Her eyes softened slightly, like she thought that meant I was backing down. But I wasn't finished. But that doesn't change what you did. That hit harder than anything else I had said so far. The room went quiet again. Richard opened another file. There is also the issue of financial handling, he said. My mother frowned. What now? He slid a statement across the table. Bank transfers. Small withdrawals over time. Utility payments. Medical reimbursements. All tied to accounts I had partially supported over the years. My stomach tightened as I realized what I was looking at. She had been using my contributions as justification. Not just for help, but for control. This is unrelated, she snapped quickly. Those are family funds. Richard shook his head once. They are not. Tyler spoke again, quieter now. Mom, did you really think this would work? She ignored him. Her focus stayed locked on me. You're letting strangers decide our family's future, she said. No, I replied. You decided that when you involved them. That was the moment her expression changed again. Not anger. Not guilt. Something closer to panic. Because she realized she was losing the narrative completely. The compliance officer leaned forward. Ms. Brooks, he said to me directly, at this stage, we will need your formal statement regarding whether you authorize any transfer or release of liability. Everyone looked at me. Even my mother. And for the first time, I understood that whatever I said next would decide everything. The room felt smaller than before. Like the walls had quietly moved in closer while nobody was looking. Everyone was waiting for my answer. The compliance officer, Richard, Tyler, even my mother. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she wasn't speaking. She wasn't interrupting. She wasn't trying to control the story. She was waiting. That alone said more than anything she had argued all day. The officer leaned forward slightly. Ms. Brooks, he said again, do you authorize the transfer that was attempted under your name? I looked down at the table. At the trust documents. At my grandfather's handwriting. At everything that had been built to protect me from exactly this kind of moment. Then I looked at my mother. She looked tired now. Not angry. Not confident. Just tired in a way I had never seen before. For a second, I almost said yes. Not because it was true. Because it would have ended everything faster. But then I remembered the hospital. The moment she said, you weren't using it anyway. Like my life being on pause made my rights optional. I looked back at the officer. No, I said clearly. I do not authorize any transfer. The air in the room shifted immediately. My mother closed her eyes like she had been holding her breath the entire time and just ran out of strength. Tyler muttered something under his breath, but didn't argue. Richard nodded once, like this was the answer he expected. The compliance officer wrote something down. Understood, he said. Then the attempted sale is officially invalid. My mother suddenly sat forward again. Invalid, she repeated. So that's it, we just reverse it. The officer didn't respond right away. Then he said something that changed the tone completely. This also triggers a review for attempted misrepresentation during a financial transaction. My mother froze. What does that mean? Tyler asked quietly. Richard answered before anyone else could. It means, he said carefully, this is no longer just about the car. My mother shook her head quickly. No, no, this is ridiculous. I didn't steal anything. But her voice wasn't strong anymore. It was shaking. The officer continued. Based on documentation submitted and the forged signature confirmation, this case may be escalated internally for fraud review. The word fraud landed like a physical hit. My mother's face changed instantly. That was the moment she finally understood. This wasn't a family argument anymore. It wasn't something she could talk her way out of. Tyler leaned toward her slightly. Mom, what did you do? I didn't do anything wrong, she said quickly, but her voice cracked halfway through. Richard spoke calmly again. The vehicle will be returned to secure holding under legal protection until ownership is fully restored. My mother turned toward me sharply. You're really going to let this destroy me? She asked. And there it was again. That final attempt. Not logic. Not truth. Just guilt. I held her gaze. I didn't destroy anything, I said quietly. I just didn't cover it up. That was the last thing I said to her. Because after that, everything moved without me. The officer stood up. This meeting is concluded for now, he said. We will follow up with formal documentation. Tyler stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. Richard gathered his files calmly. My mother stayed seated for a few seconds longer, staring at the table like it might give her a different outcome if she looked hard enough. Then she finally stood. But she didn't look at me this time. Not even once. As she walked out of the room, the weight she carried didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like realization, catching up with her too late. When the door closed behind them, the silence that followed was different. Not tense. Not heavy. Just finished. I sat back slowly in my chair, finally letting myself breathe properly for the first time in days. Richard looked at me quietly. You handled that well, he said. I didn't feel like I had. I just felt drained. Is it over? I asked. He hesitated for a second. Legally, he said, the car is yours again. A pause. But emotionally, he added, that part takes longer. I nodded slowly. Because that part was already obvious. Outside the dealership windows, life kept moving like nothing important had happened. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone my silence anymore. The first thing I did after everything settled was pick up the car. Not the dealership version of picked up, the real one. Keys in my hand, engine starting after weeks of silence, that familiar low rumble filling my chest like something that had been waiting for me to come back. The Mustang sat in the secured storage bay, untouched, and exactly how Grandpa left it. When I stepped inside, the smell hit me first. Old leather, slight oil, that faint mix of metal and time that no modern car can copy. I sat there for a long moment without starting it. Just breathing. Because for days, everything in my life had been about control being taken away. Decisions made for me. Stories rewritten without my permission. But here, nothing had changed unless I touched it. I turned the key. The engine came alive instantly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to calm. Not because everything was fixed, but because something was finally mine again. Later that afternoon, Richard called. The dealership finalized the reversal, he said. Ownership is fully restored to you. The buyer was refunded without issue. I leaned against the car door. And my mother, I asked. A short pause. It will likely move into internal review, he said carefully. But that is separate from your case now. Separate. That word felt strange. Like I was no longer standing in the middle of their decisions. Just observing the consequences from a distance. That night, Tyler texted me. We need to talk. Mom is not okay. I didn't reply right away. Because for the first time, I realized something important. I didn't automatically rush to fix things anymore. I had spent years being the emergency solution for a family that only called when things broke. And now, I was finally learning what it felt like to not pick up every broken piece. A few days later, my mother showed up at my apartment. I didn't open the door immediately. She knocked twice, then stopped, then knocked again, softer this time. When I finally opened it, she didn't look like the woman from the dealership. No confidence, no anger, no control. Just someone standing there trying to figure out where everything went wrong. I didn't know it would go that far, she said quietly. I nodded once, but it did. She looked down. Long pause. I thought I was helping, she added. I know, I said. That was the truth. The hardest truth. Because intent didn't erase impact. She swallowed hard. Are you going to cut me off completely? I took a moment before answering. I'm going to stop letting you make decisions for me, I said. That's different. She nodded slowly like she understood, even if she didn't like it. Before leaving, she glanced toward my car parked outside. I never meant to take it from you, she said. I believed her. But I also knew it almost didn't matter anymore. Because the damage wasn't just the sale. It was the realization of how easily it happened. After she left, I sat on my couch for a long time just thinking. About Grandpa. About how quietly he prepared for something I never even saw coming. About how trust isn't just emotional. It's structural. And if you don't protect it, people will eventually assume they have access to it. That weekend, I drove the Mustang out of the city. No destination. Just open road. Windows down, engine steady, air moving fast enough to make everything feel lighter for the first time in weeks. And somewhere between the highway lines and the fatting sun, I finally understood something simple. You don't win these situations by fighting louder. You win by refusing to let people rewrite what belongs to you. A week passed before things started to feel normal again. Not fixed, not forgotten, just quieter. My life settled into a strange new rhythm. Work emails, early mornings, and the Mustang sitting in my parking garage like a reminder that some parts of my life were still intact. But I didn't rush back into old habits. No long phone calls with my mother. No emergency problem-solving for Tyler. No automatic guilt response when someone else was stressed. Just space. A lot of space. And honestly, it felt uncomfortable at first. One evening, I was sitting in my apartment when Richard called again. I wanted to update you, he said. The dealership confirmed everything has been closed out on their end. The internal review is ongoing, but your involvement is complete. I leaned back on the couch. So it's really done. As far as your case goes, yes. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. There was a pause on the line before he added something unexpected. Your grandfather would be relieved, he said. That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Because I kept thinking about how he must have seen this coming. Not the exact situation, but the pattern. People assuming access. People confusing family connection with ownership. People believing emotional pressure could override boundaries. He didn't just protect a car. He protected a principle. A few days later, Tyler showed up outside my building. I saw him from my window before I went down. He looked different too. Less defensive, less careless, more uncertain. When I stepped outside, he rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. Mom's still upset, he said. I nodded. I figured. He hesitated. She thinks you ruined everything. I let that sit for a moment. Did I asked. He didn't answer immediately. That was enough. Finally, he sighed. I think she just didn't expect you to push back. That part made sense. Because for years, I didn't. Not really. I just absorbed things, paid things, fixed things. He kicked a small rock on the pavement. I didn't think she would go that far either, he admitted. I believed him. But belief didn't undo involvement. "Tyler," I said carefully, "you signed those papers." He nodded immediately. "I know." Another pause. "I thought I was helping," he said quietly. That phrase again. I had heard it too many times lately. Helping, fixing, handling things. All words people use when they don't want to call something what it actually is. We stood there for a moment without speaking. Then I said something I didn't expect myself to say. "I'm not angry anymore," I told him. He looked up slightly. "But I'm not going back to how things were." That was the difference. Not punishment. Just boundaries. He nodded slowly like he understood, even if it didn't feel good. Before leaving, he glanced toward the garage. "You still drive it?" he asked. "Sometimes," I said. He gave a small half-smile. "Grandpa would have liked that." Then he left. That night, I drove the Mustang again. Not fast, not far. Just enough to feel the engine respond when I asked it to. And somewhere along that quiet road, I realized something important. This wasn't really a story about a car. It was about permission. Who gets to make decisions about your life when you're not looking? Who assumes silence means agreement? Who thinks kindness means availability? And who finally decides that neither of those things are true anymore? When I got home, I parked and sat in the driver's seat for a while longer than usual. I looked at the steering wheel. At the worn edges Grandpa's hands had probably touched thousands of times. And I thought about how easily everything almost disappeared. Not because I was careless, but because I trusted people who confused family with control. I turned the engine off and sat in silence. No calls, no pressure, no urgency. Just quiet. And for the first time, that quiet didn't feel like something I had to fix. It felt like something I had earned. The following morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to. Because I wanted to. There was something different about the way time felt now. Slower. Less controlled by other people's urgency. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the city move without needing to be part of every problem in it. My phone stayed quiet for once. No emergency texts, no guilt-driven calls, no sudden "we need you" moments. Just silence. And for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt clear. Later that day, I took the Mustang out again. The engine started smooth, like it recognized me now, like it understood I wasn't just visiting anymore. I didn't drive far. Just enough to end up near the edge of the city, where things got quieter and the roads opened up. I parked for a while under an old bridge and turned the engine off. The world felt far away in a good way. That's when I realized something I wish I had understood earlier in life. People don't always respect what you own. Sometimes they respect what they can access. And if you never set limits, they'll assume there aren't any. I used to think family meant automatic trust. That love meant letting things slide. That keeping peace meant staying quiet. But peace that costs your boundaries isn't peace at all. It's just silence with pressure underneath it. My mother didn't wake up one day planning everything that happened. It started small, assumptions, justifications, temporary decisions made without asking. That's how it always starts. And if nobody says no early enough, it becomes normal. That was the hardest lesson in all of this. Not the betrayal itself, but how long I allowed small oversteps to grow into something bigger. That evening, I got one last message from Richard. "Everything finalized. You're fully protected going forward. Your grandfather planned well." I stared at that message for a while. He really did. Not just in documents, but in mindset. In teaching me that no is not cruelty. It's clarity. Later, I parked the Mustang back in its garage and stood there for a moment before walking away. I didn't lock anything extra. I didn't double-check. For once, I trusted that what was mine would stay mine, because I understood how to protect it now. Before ending this story, I just want to say something simple. If you've ever been in a situation where people expected you to stay quiet, or let things go, or accept decisions made for you because you're family or easygoing, you're not alone. But silence has a cost. And so does speaking up. The real question is which cost you're willing to live with. Because at the end of the day, respect doesn't come from explaining yourself better. It comes from refusing to be handled like your voice doesn't matter. If this story connected with you, leave a comment and share your experience. It might help someone who's going through something similar right now. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. And if this message meant something to you, click hype so it can reach someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for staying until the end.